Thank you for tuning in. You're now listening to
Deliberately Woke.
We have a lot to talk about.
Let's get into it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about code switching and just what it is and like how it presents itself and just our experiences with it. I think it's a really interesting phenomenon, especially like in like workplace settings and like even situations with law enforcement or like
Or authority figures in
authority
general.
figures or the systems that be, government and so forth. So I just wanted us to talk about because I think it's something that is really important. So I want you to listen to this definition.
It's called code switching. Okay, no, I'm prepared. I knew this would happen. Code switching is the only way I can talk to white people so they can understand what I'm saying. Oh, okay, you want like a more official definition? Sure. Let's see. Wait a minute. Code switching. It's the gift to shift between alternate ways of communicating and languages.
Yeah, so listening to that definition, wow, it makes me like really annoyed. Like I'm definitely like triggered by this person having to like explain what they mean when it's so plain. It's obvious like what they're trying to convey. But having to change the way that you talk to get other people to understand you is something that Black and brown people do, and a lot of people do this. Whether you're an immigrant or different country, you have to learn how to speak to people in a way that you're going to be understood. But I get annoyed with it because it's the same language. Maybe there's different phrasing of things, but you can understand the gist of what somebody's saying. And I think that we're forced to code switch, and it's a way that kind of puts us in the space where we're other and
Different
and almost feels like less than. Because her describing like, oh, you didn't understand what I said when it was so clear what she said in the video. It's just like, why are you doing this? I mean, I know why they're doing it. It's definitely like racist, and it's the reason why we have to do this in the first place, to be seen, to be heard, to get things like loans, to interact with banks. Like you said, all of the systems and powers that be, we alter ourselves to fit into this world because we on our own are not accepted. And I think like my definition of code switching is like kind of like having the multiple identities and having to like straddle those
social interactions and all those identities that you have. And there are two definitions, right? They're like, watching the video, I like how I like hearing that definition. I like how there's two separate ones and the way that one would be perceived as more casual and then one formal.
Yeah,
and I
exactly.
feel like one that's more for like your friends or being kind of like, I don't want to say dumbed down because it's not dumbed down, but like it's perceived as that.
Formal.
And then one that's formalized or more that,
Proper.
using big words or SAT words to prove that you can straddle like a different world, that you can be educated and talk, eloquently and, elegantly, whatever that is.
And be heard.
And be heard. So that is what I find interesting about this definition. But also like, there are two definitions for code switch. I mean, there's one of someone who's bilingual or speaks multiple languages, straddling all those languages in different situations, because, speaking different languages, your personality is different in the language, or the way you communicate or mannerisms change. But then there's also the social definition, which what you're talking about, and I think is what we're talking about more broadly, is like when you identify with multiple identities or multiple cultures, and you're kind of navigating between social interactions, right? So when you're with your friends or your community, right, you speak a different way, you're more relaxed because you're trying to get street cred or be like, I'm down, right? Obama did that a few times when he was president, like,
they all do it.
They all do it.
Even down to some people saying they listen to Tupac to try and get in with, as if that makes you more acceptable or like one of us.
Exactly. And then you have the other where you're especially like in the workplace or like, you know, in when you're dealing with authority powers, right? Or people in authority positions, you kind of like, you know, refine your language or your lexicon, right? And you're using like bigger words or trying to sound more educated or prove something, right? And I think that is like, it's exhausting, always straddling two worlds. But also code switching is like, at least when I'm doing it, is making white people
feel
comfortable around me,
right?
And like less threatening and more like, hey, I can do your social norms and your cultural norms too. Like, I'm educated in this, which is really weird, but that's how I feel.
Well, it's more of like a survival thing and like needing to fit in to, you know, whatever social setting you're in. Now, granted, like work is definitely a place where you are expected to be more formal, but it's not just that, because it's like, if you were to use certain phrases, even though they have the same meaning, your message might be lost, or more so, I think it is ignored. Because like I said before, it's not that people can't actually understand what it is that you're saying when you speak.
Yes.
With different phrases of lexicon, whatever, different vocabulary words. It's that they choose not to, and they put you in this box where you actually don't fit in. You really don't know how things work here.
Exactly.
So it becomes like we want to be able to fit in and to be seen and to be heard, so we fit into their box and are acceptable. And I think what I'm really trying to say is overcompensate, at least speaking personally for myself. Yeah. Overcompensate for the shortcomings that other people have projected onto me that I don't actually have, that don't exist, but it's something that I then put onto myself. You know, I think about like even just certain behaviors that I've adopted. Like, I think about the fact that I overtip with things because of this negative like stereotype that Black people don't tip. And I'm talking about like in nail salons or restaurants. And, you know, what's really fucked up is like having been in situations where you're treated like shit from the onset. And then like me personally feeling like I should still tip because I don't want them to say,
well, you also feel like you're the representative for the whole community
and it's
that
like,
you're a part of.
It's like, you know, I have to like make the experience for the next Black person a decent one, or change their mind about people that they have this ridiculous notion about based on propaganda in the first place. And I feel personally responsible for it, or like my actions say that I do.
Exactly.
And I mean, I even think about it like in school, like growing up and going to high school and being like one of the only, you know, Black girls in my school, and wanting to not be seen, like kind of go under the radar and not have to, or like, when I say that, I mean like being seen for all I am, like my true personality, because I don't want to have to explain certain things to people, because there already is this notion about me just based on my skin color, having nothing to do with actually, you know, who I am, what my personality's like. I mean, I used to get asked, oh, how do you do this dance at like school dances, like because the white girls didn't know, you know, who Young Jock was. So
oh, wow.
And I'm like, I'd be like, I don't know, and like do the dance myself or whatever. But even just like having to do that, or like feeling like annoyed and not saying anything, and not just being like, I don't know the fucking dance, or why don't you know the dance, or why are you asking me?
Exactly.
You know, and then, I mean, you run the risk of somebody crying. I mean, at this point in my life, it's like, whatever. But at the time, like, really just trying to be under the radar and not be seen, even though it's so crazy, because obviously I'm being seen regardless of if I want to be or not.
But I think that's interesting what you're saying, because I also I think it is, code switching is on the burden of people of color, right?
Absolutely.
It's not on like white people, but also code switching is like they've standardized the way they act and the way they speak as like like, or elegant, right? Even the things that they do, like, you know, tennis and like all these,
or certain
things that
things.
becomes cultural norms, and you like are trying to like be a part of that, and they become the standard, the standard for what is right or proper. And I think that too is problematic because the way we speak language and the way we interact is part of our culture, right? And it shouldn't be seen as less than. It should just be, it's different.
Then that's it.
But that's it. It's not less than, and one is not superior to the other.
Yeah.
And also what resonated with me when you were talking about school is like growing up in New York City, white schools is where I went always, because they were, that's where people who were educated, right? You had to talk white, sound white, use white words. Like growing up with my cousins saying, "Oh, you're using white words. How are words white?" I don't understand.
Yeah. I mean, I never got that criticism from my immediate family. Like, and they sent, I know our parents sent us to these schools because, it's fucked up that whiteness is associated with something better, but it is actually like the case that, these schools are better and you have a greater opportunity to succeed, and go to college afterwards and, do everything that you need to do to be able to survive in this world, while also like having to be better than, and having this pressure on you to perform and outperform yourself.
And always in the back of your head, like family members saying that you have to work twice as hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
To get half as much.
It being understood.
Exactly.
Like, my mother's always like, hold your head high. Like, this is how you walk into a room. This is who you are. Like, and it was never told to me like, specifically like, to aspire to whiteness or anything like that. But it is fucked up that the only schools that, were acceptable were this. I mean, even... I think about this, like even going to college, like being, the HBCUs are not good enough. Like this fucked up mentality that you have based on standardized testing results, that the students had in certain schools. And that even like those standards and where they come from, like are just totally white. Like some of the questions that they ask, even on like IQ tests, don't really suggests like real intelligence. Like it's more of a standard that they've set, and because they like it and because of what's
or they benefit from it,
then that's what's right.
Exactly. And I'm not saying that it's like that they're that when our families put us in these schools that they want us to be white or whiteness, but they have rationalized and they have been conditioned that we have to navigate to be successful, a certain level of whiteness, and making them feel comfortable with us, and kind of being then we become the representatives for our communities. The same thing when something goes, when there's wrong, it's like, oh my God.
Yeah, I know. It's like,
what happened? They're asking you like, this individual, and it's like,
I know.
I don't know.
I mean, I hate when a black person does something fucked up, because then I'm like, oh man.
But that's wrong.
It is wrong because we're all people, right?
Exactly.
And they're shitty people of all races and creeds, whatever. Like, and I shouldn't have to be like lumped into a category. Nobody should be. But it is actually what happens, though.
Yeah.
It's the reason. This is like, code switching is like the response to it.
And that's why it's survival, and you learn it. And unfortunately, when when you're around, certain people, or, when you're going to an all-white school or majority white school, you learn how to navigate through that and be acceptable to them, where you're like, and it's kind of like non-threatening, right? Yeah. It feeds into that narrative that people of color are more violent and aggressive because you find yourself like you were saying, your behavior is changing because you're like, even with over tipping, that's could be considered a microaggression kind of response, right? Like being like, oh my God, I have to make sure that I'm tipping properly. The same thing like when like going through bank loans, which is something I'm dealing with now, is like making sure, okay, I'm gonna make sure that I make punctuation when I speak and when I'm writing, because my last name is Spanish, and it's like all these things where you don't realize, but you've been conditioned because you're in these systems and navigating your race and being like, oh, I'm just as good. Even I remember in college, people were like, oh, you only got here through affirmative action. It's like, whoa, it's like... No, it's not, And
also, the numbers don't even match up with the population. So what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And it's actually your ass who doesn't deserve to be here. But because you're white, actually you're getting into the school, or because maybe your parents have some money or whatever. Like,
exactly.
It's that's totally like projection and just fucked up. But it says a lot to the stereotypes that people have about brown people not being intelligent,
Yeah.
not being able to actually communicate. And it's like so crazy, like 'cause what you're talking about, like having a last name that's Spanish and people then like being like, oh, can you speak English? But it's more so than like your ability to speak English. Like it's like deeper. It's like your comprehension level. Like, are you smart enough to understand this?
Or like in college, some of my friends were shocked when my family would visit and we flip between two languages in one sentence or a conversation. It's like, how, you know? Or like when in college, like people seeing, because on the rooms we had our last names and my last name being exotic, but then other like Eastern European or other names that are very hard to pronounce are like standardized because you're European, and that's what we want to hear. But like my last name, which is very, very common.
Or even somebody being bilingual who's white, straight up white, not being like their intelligence not being questioned.
Exactly.
Like, it's like special. Oh wow, they speak.
No, but
language.
it's automatic. It's automatically like understood that they're smart or whatever it is. Like there's never a question of their intelligence.
No, not at all. But that's the racist side of the things.
Exactly.
That's where it comes from.
You know, and you see these situations, and I feel like code switching is learned in school, you know, and it's like, you know, you see it when wherever you go to school, because that's the problem with, like, you know, a lot of people of color when they go to college, right? And like, even if they're like, you know, went to a school in their community and then they go to, you know, a school that's predominantly white or that's perceived as prestigious, they have these racial interactions with you know, with professors or the administration. You know, even me in high school, it was like, you should go to community college.
I mean,
and it's like, wait, why?
Yeah, I mean,
like,
I had
basis is
it's
this?
insane. I went to a college preparatory school. There's nobody there that's going to community college. They're supposed to prepare you for college and not community college, and there's nothing wrong with community college.
No, there's nothing wrong with it.
It's
not like a 4-year
it's not an elite school that, you know, people are paying money for you to get into at the end, and for you to have the audacity to say, I don't know if your parents can afford NYU. I don't think you should apply.
I mean, my parents couldn't.
I mean, yeah, but that doesn't mean that I can't get into the damn school.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no,
and then putting that on me, like, and I really thought from that meeting I was gonna have to go to community college. And when I told my mom, she was livid and infuriated and was like, I'm taking over. And she did. And then, you know, where I went to school and where I applied, but I didn't even have the confidence to apply to schools that I got into easily.
Same.
Because this woman told me that I could not. And also, like, you know, I just gauged the interactions. I thought, well, maybe I'm not as smart as the other people, knowing good and damn well that I actually am. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm in this school for a reason in the first place, you know? Yeah. But yeah, it happens from a young age. I mean, even with my brother going to school, I mean, somebody who's gone to a private school his whole life and is not like me. So he didn't try to like fit into any type of mold, never has, never will. And that's something that's infuriating for a lot of these white teachers. And they project like, you're arrogant. My brother's not anybody who's ever been in trouble with anything. Like, does his work, very intelligent young man. And they had this idea of who they want him to be. And they project that and stick that onto him. And because he's somebody who's not going to remain quiet and going to question things, had a horrible experience going through this type of school system.
Well, they also deem men of color like violent and dumb and like, you know, like Neanderthals and all these things from a young age.
Yeah, being accused of plagiarism, even though there are websites. Yeah, there are websites that say, you know, you can proof your work.
Right away. You just put the document
and it will
there.
let you know immediately. They went through that process and there was nothing found. And it's like, I just don't believe that he could have thought of this.
Of course.
And because you believe that, you're going to file some sort of action against him in school that could go on his record. Like, it has to have a meeting with all the administrators. I mean, insane. But this is what people go through. And having to navigate this world. Like, so, of course, you know, I mean, no,
you learn how to code switch
exactly.
to survive.
And you don't want to ruffle any feathers. I don't want to be in this. I don't want to be in this situation. I want to be seen, you know, I'm saying I want to be seen. People want to be seen as unproblematic so that they can gain access to other things, you know? And it's not right. It's not right, but it is like a reality that most of us are faced with. Like, you know how many qualified black men that I've like referred to job positions that were immediately rejected, like once they find out that this person is black, having nothing to do with their, you know, level of education or their experience, but it's just the stereotype that people have of young black men.
Yeah, exactly. And the same thing with the school. I have relatives that are darker skin, and in school I remember one thing that was like it was so big, the family, like it was a conversation, was about saying that, oh, you know, he has to be more than just a pretty face, implying that, you know, like he was getting by because he was darker skinned, but like perceived as good looking or whatever, and not talking about his, you know, talking about his grades or anything.
Yeah.
And that whole thing, like what you're saying with your brother, is like that they create these narratives,
they want
and these
you to
images
be this.
of you, and then they have the power as the teacher to like set your whole trajectory of your life and your career in school, you know?
Absolutely.
Like, I remember how many times they said I had ADHD and all these things, and it was not proven. But it's because, like, that narrative of being, like, a man of color and being aggressive and, like, oh, God, we gotta, like, we have to, like, manage your behavior and how you act now before you become a beast or something.
Yeah.
And, like,
it's all preliminary before they even, I mean, they're preconceived notions.
Exactly. And that's why I feel like code switching, you learn it from survival, particularly in your social interactions in the educational system.
Absolutely.
You know, I remember growing up in New York City public schools, them always, when they would give us a pamphlet, it would be in English and Spanish, and my family would be pissed. They're like, yo, we speak English too.
Right.
We speak Spanish, but we speak English too. Can you stop this?
Yeah.
Right? And it's always...
Well, I'm speaking to you in English plainly right now. Like, I don't need this.
And those type of things, it's like these perceived notions, and like that's where you learn how to code switch. So then you are like, oh my God, I'm going to speak proper English because they think that I don't speak it, or they hear an accent or something, and you start rationalizing why they feel like you don't speak English. And it's those type of things.
Thank God I didn't realize, you know, that some of my family has accents when I was in school, just because growing up, you know, obviously I would never know, but I think that would have like made me feel like I had to overcompensate anymore. Because as it is, I mean, I've always been told, oh, you're articulate.
Of course.
You speak so well. She's so polite. She's so and it's like little, you know.
Microaggressions.
Yeah. We were expecting her to be this monster.
Yeah.
And
we would never think we were going to understand your English.
But she's so great.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
You know, you're so, and keep doing this. And I have to comment on it because it's just so strange to me, even though I've never interacted with black people before.
Exactly. And that's the whole thing. Or you speak, oh my God, you speak so well. Or where are you from? You know, like all these questions. It's like, you know, white people don't have the monopoly on the English language, you know, or like, or education, or, you know.
Education, being intelligent. And also English isn't the only language. I mean, I know we're talking specifically
right,
about,
of course. Yeah,
you know, America.
Of course.
You know.
Where we grew up.
Yeah,
so
where we grew up. But I imagine that this is something that is faced for
of course,
all across. I mean, even when you tell me about your experience in Spain, you know,
exactly,
and the way that you were treated, and people pretending not to understand your accent, like, oh, you're just so low, you're other, you're the conquered, and you know, you don't speak this right.
No, it exists for sure in other languages. You know, with Spanish, it's like the accent, what country you're from. There's a hierarchy on what country is, you know, perceived, you know, good enough for like, you know, to speak it, or like, you know, on par with like Spanish from Spain. And then there's other ones, you know, like from the Caribbean. A lot of Spanish speakers are deemed like, oh my God, they're so low and this, and it's like you know, it's not even Spanish, you know, and it's those things. I mean, it's all race driven. But yeah, definitely. I mean, though in Spain, I wouldn't say I was code switching because I can't speak like them. But I was more reserved, and like, you know, I was told that the way I speak is very loud and very like expressive. So I was a little more reserved in trying to pronounce things differently. So, you know, code switching shows up, but it's also because you don't want to feel other, but there's also kind of like it's like you're something else. It's like it's dehumanizing at a point,
I know what
and
you mean.
it's just
Because
not a good feeling.
It's not just like adjusting like to a culture of some other place, or like trying to, you know, be respectful or anything like that. Or it's more so that they see you and assume, and you know that they're assuming based on the way that they're looking at you. It can be unspoken a lot of the time, or it's actually spoken, and somebody will have the audacity to say something to you.
Oh yeah.
Or give, you know, those little jabs, those microaggressions. But it's not about them actually understanding you, or you just being, oh, I didn't catch that. Can you say it again? It's not like that. It's like, I already know you're trash. You don't speak this, or like, I'm not going to understand you because I'm higher. I'm above you, and I speak it right, and you're wrong.
Right.
And you're less than.
But also, like, some people don't have an experience that, or they stay in, you know, in a homogenous community, right? And then they interact with, like, we're talking about these, you know, authority figures or powers or systems. And when they interact with them, they don't know how to articulate, and they're seen as threatened. And some of them, you know, they lose their lives because of that. The same thing with, like, police encounters, right? Like, I think about that with code switching, because you think about people that are able to articulate themselves in the way that's acceptable for white people, right? In a situation, and sometimes not, obviously.
Yeah.
But in some situations, that I think about that because of the space that I work in. I think about, like, you know, people who are educated and like, oh no, I live here, you know, like cops barging into their house and like, oh, your neighbor saw a black face in the window and thought it was a burglar, and being able to navigate through that, and having that burden of being, you know, in a shock, but also being like, okay, I'm going to, you know, try to be as non-threatening to the white guy with the gun.
At the same time that I'm being harmed.
And exactly. And that is like what is so infuriating about this, because obviously the workplace is, our lives are not threatened, but that's why this is problematic. This code switching is because, like, we're constantly trying to navigate our negative social reactions in the systems and in society, but also trying to be like non-threatening and be we could act white, you know, we could be with, you know, we know how to talk properly and be non-threatening, and it's bullshit.
Well, it is bullshit because the opposite is not. Obviously, it's not non-threatening. They're very threatening, and they're imposing.
Exactly.
It's more like imposing this. If you don't do this,
right?
Well, even if you do it,
of course, like, for some cases,
it's still not going to help. Like, for some cases, in some cases they will. You will be seen as acceptable,
right?
But it doesn't even matter.
I'm thinking of that, like, growing up, like I said, as I'm getting older, I'm reflecting a lot. And at first I thought my family had no racial, like, situations, right? Happened to them, right? And no, like, traumatic situations. But as I get older, I realize, because some of my relatives are white passing, but even them, because of their name, like, and the way, because they went to college here, and they know that, even without saying it's code switching, they know that. Like, I had a relative change their first and last name for business purposes.
Well, that's to fit in.
And like, but like, they were able to navigate situations with law enforcement,
better.
or being in a restaurant and they're calling us Spanish speaking N-word, right? This is what they're calling us, right? And that relative being able to navigate through that and being like, oh, okay, we're just gonna leave. But if you're like someone that are rightfully reacting to these people,
you may have a really horrible situation,
or the police are called, and you may lose your life.
Exactly.
And that is fucked up, you know? And that's what I think about as I get older, like where I went to school and stuff. I have the tools to just engage white people in a way, or like being non-threatening. I feel like when
it's exhausting,
and it's exhausting,
it's beyond exhausting,
and that's why life is just like, sometimes you're like, oh, you just don't want to do it, or you have your outbursts when you're just like, fuck this, and you're like, I'm gonna be unfiltered and real right now because this is bullshit.
And I mean, what you say about people changing their names is so interesting, because I think about, like, hate this word exotic. It's so relative and ridiculous, but like naming your kid what you want to name them, right? And having a black sounding name or a Latin sounding name is seen as negative. Some people don't want to do this because they're like, damn, all of this shit is going to be projected onto my child. And like, I understand that, but it is really fucked up that you can't even choose certain things that you want. And there's nothing wrong with these names.
No.
We've been brainwashed to think that there's something wrong
Well, we've
with
been brainwashed
names.
to think that English or Irish or these names, like Western European names, are standard and beautiful.
And they're not.
And then,
standards for where? For who?
For white supremacy. Yeah. Exactly.
It's really a horrible, it's really exhausting being in this place. And then I think about, you know, when you mention racist experiences that your family has had and things, the way that people will say things coded to you. I'll never forget being on a bus with my family years ago, like 15 years ago.
Right.
And you know, my brother was younger, sitting in the seat next to me. There were other seats available, and this white woman saw this older white man standing near us. Obviously, he didn't want to sit down because there were other seats that were available. And she's like, oh, maybe you can hold your son so he can sit down, talking to my parents. And they were like, no, he's sitting down in this chair. Why would he have to move? Well, so that this man can sit down. And then, I mean, my parents were not like abiding by this because this goes into our talk of Karen and like them being like the overseer of everywhere they're at on the bus, telling you got to give your kid's seat up for them. And it's like, and eventually she started saying, well, you know, culturally where I'm from, like we respect our elders. And my parents went off. I don't even remember what happened. The lady ended up getting off the bus because it was just a yelling match at that point, like, because my mom was trying to stay out of it. And then once she said that, I know, it was like, go away. The man was like, I don't want to sit down. The man was like, I do not want to sit down.
Karen to the rescue.
And she's like, culturally, where I'm from, we do these things. And it's like, bitch, get the fuck off this bus and shut the fuck up. Stop fucking talking to me. Mind your business.
Yeah.
But like this idea that they have, you know,
she has every right to do that.
Yeah, the trademark on like the
proper
way
behavior.
Yeah, on proper behavior,
what
and it's only part of her culture,
right?
Because I know your culture is full of
barbaric,
savages,
yeah, exactly.
And you know you don't know how to act, and I'm here to teach you and enforce it too.
Exactly.
It's beyond exhausting. Has happened my entire life. Yeah. You know, if I go back, I mean, I have had several interactions that I can remember. I mean, all the things I can't remember, or little things like, you know, that happened in school that teachers would say, and you don't, like you said, you don't think about it until you're older and then realize, oh, this is what's happening. You know, this is what they meant when they said this thing to me,
right? And
or this is why they said it, so that I'd still be thinking about it today.
Exactly.
You know, oh, man. But yeah, it's a tightrope that we have to like walk across.
It is, and it's exhausting. And like I said, it's those interactions where even in a situation like that where you're like, just leave me alone. You're angry, but you're trying to be calm because you don't want people to react in a way where because you already know they think you're violent and all these things. So I can't be mad at this, even though I have every right to be, and nobody should be able to talk to me like this. Exactly. Yeah, it's something. Yeah. And just that whole thing, and then how they're condescending. If you rightfully react to a way like, this is crazy, it's like, oh, please, you know. No, or they'll start crying. They'll turn the tables on you. I mean, we've seen the videos of what people do in these types of situations. Person's acting calm. I mean, even like having to teach your child, like, when you get pulled over, like, this is the behavior. Like you're saying, you have to assume so that your brains aren't blown out in the front seat. And even if you do that shit, it's still possible that it happens, as we know. Exactly. Yeah. It's insane. And, it's the same thing as, like, being out late at night, like that's something like my family always like, be careful outside and all these things, because my God, you could be perceived as someone that's
as a
threat or violent, and then they'll just shoot you, and that's it. It's like these type of things that why I think code switching is a problem, but it's also a form of survival.
It is a form of survival. I find it interesting, like that second definition was like, it's a gift to be able to do this, and it's like, I'm so torn, because it's not a gift that I necessarily want in terms of like having to use it is the point.
But the burden's on us. They don't have to code switch.
Because they don't.
It's always us, like us obliging to their standards and what they think is normal and acceptable behavior. So do it. In some cases, do it or die. Right? That's the situation.
Just one other thing I want to say is, I think it's interesting that, because not all white people, we know this, don't speak properly.
Of course.
They don't have the command over the English language. They couldn't write something for you that is like coherent, a lot of people. And yet they will still be given the benefit of the doubt. So it's not actually being acceptable in terms of what you're saying and how you speak. But it boils down to the racism.
Yeah.
They'll be fine. Like, I don't know how to say that. I'm just going to speak to you plain like I speak.
Right.
And I'm going to still get.
And that's real America, though.
That's real
considered
America.
Real
that's
heartland.
Fine.
That's the heartland.
We have to support these people that maybe, they're, the blue collar workers who don't have like a certain level of education, and take care of these people or like respect them mainly. There's a level of respect that they're able to maintain through their whiteness that isn't afforded to other people, no matter how educated you are, how well you articulate yourself. That's
true.
Yeah.
So. And that's exactly the case, and that's why I think of it as a problem. And I don't know how the solution to the problem, because it's the only way to survive in the current system and things are run. It's the only way to survive, because you hear it, like I was saying, in every situation. Even right now with me and dealing with banks and stuff, the racism is insane that it's still
and it's like
this level.
And I hate talking to people who are supposedly allies, and it's like, well, but you're teaching. You got to teach other people.
Right.
Like, no, the burden shouldn't be on me. I'm not fucking Google. I'm not YouTube.
Well, the burden is on us because they are comfortable with us being their servants and serving them.
Very true.
And that's
it's
a
long-lasting mentality.
That's what it's about. It's like we always do the extra mile because we're still like they like dance for us, dance for us, show us,
or you'll get
exactly.
hurt too.
And it's still like
you have to play this game.
And it's crazy because I've never dealt with this industry before, and now I'm like, my God, this is why. Like, it's so hard to succeed here and have access to the same resources. And yet, if you put like the demographics, right? Like what you were saying to white people that are, deemed lesser or, that are like, uneducated and living in a rural part of the country, which have their problems, they're still going to get more access to equity and to capital than I would just based on my name.
Yeah.
And like our lives are completely different.
They don't even have to see you, which is the interesting part.
Exactly.
Your dynamic.
Exactly. And that's the part where it's like, my God, how do I navigate through this country? And like, as I continue to try to build, wealth and build things, like how am I going to do that when every step, even with code switching, there is some
barrier,
some stereotype, some stigma.
Yeah, that's not a real barrier, but it's all of that. It's all made up.
It's all made
not
up.
Real. It's not actually what you're presenting.
Exactly. And it is what it is. And then the allies are like, and the people that work in these industries are like, but there's nothing they're going to do about it. They're just like, this is unfortunate.
Yeah, it's terrible.
But this is the way of it.
You can I'm sure they come up with creative ways like, you can teach people about, phrases you use too, and like bring it in. And I see some people trying to make it, and like, it's like, again, what are we supposed to do? Mm-hmm. But it is still like makes me really fucking mad.
I mean, it's hard. It's hard to monitor implicit bias, right? And it's hard to monitor what someone's thinking because again, these are narratives based on what they're watching. The media has a part to do with this, and it's all that because at some point, even when they they talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's only a certain point of it because they don't really want true equity. They don't really want true diversity. They're going to give you one seat at the table.
And it's also like, what seats? It's like a second tier seat. They're not going to be opening up these types of positions for people like that are making decisions. And they don't know anybody who's like fits these diversity standards to even like help them create what they're making, which is what I see a major problem with these organizations that are supposedly, working in our favor.
Yeah, exactly.
Or in favor of policy that will benefit us, supposedly.
Yeah, I just find there's a level of like disingenuousness to the diversity, equity, inclusion, and like in general,
Absolutely.
And I just feel like a lot of it is tokenism, and no one really wants to get at it because no one at power really wants to give it up.
It gets watered down too because people start then making excuses, like because then there's professional diversity, like which is really fucked up, like how that works in the first place, like not being able to be hired because maybe you worked in a field that was a little different or like a subset of a field that people are not with at this organization. But even that's a cop-out if you're still only hiring people that look a certain way.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you have to go the extra freaking mile.
But they don't really want to because part of all this...
I mean, it erases them if they do that.
But I think part of all of it in the code switching with like white supremacy and stuff and why they're the standard and they control the systems is because there is a level of mediocrity that they really, all the things that we're taught to be like, they're the greatest, Europe's the greatest. They're the best at democracy. They're the best at all these things. It's not true. And I think that's why there's a level of not being genuine when talking about equity, diversity, equity, inclusion, because they don't want true because they would find out how mediocre they are that sense. So that's where it's like...
And I think that's why there's all this projection of people not really being fits or not like being educated or we just couldn't find any.
Right.
It's because they don't want to like I said, if they were to allow a whole bunch of diverse people into these settings, they would take over and they would have more insight and be able to do things better based on their experience too.
Of course.
And obviously like working together, obviously this isn't like oust all white people, but it's like what you're doing, you shouldn't even be the one making this damn decision. Is part of the problem still.
Yeah. And also like people of color navigating, like we were talking about, the different systems and authority figures, right? That there is a more thrifty nature, especially if you get to a place of power, because of how all the challenges you had to navigate through to get there. And that's even when like at these decision-making tables, it's like you need those POC opinion, you need those views and perspectives because things white people just don't think about because
they don't have to because of the world, because of the systems that reinforce this whiteness and keep them there, keep them in these situations.
And the system protects them from certain challenges and
it has to reward mediocrity, unfortunately, to keep them in power because it's just
And it's not to overgeneralize that it's all white people, but I'm saying there is a level, especially like in the space that we work in and the experience that I've had, this level of mediocrity and these types of people getting promoted and making decisions and not knowing anything about what they're talking about, just to perpetuate this system. Yeah. And instead of giving a smart, and then also being threatened by young, smart POC folk, that also threatens people. I think that's why the U.S. has this idiotic notion of only speaking English. It's because people are threatened, like, oh God, you speak two languages. What the fuck? It's like,
since when is it better to only know one language?
Exactly. In a globalized world,
that makes you less educated.
Exactly.
Why wouldn't you want to compete with the rest of the world?
Exactly.
But again, it is preserving this whiteness.
This whiteness, exactly. And anyone that doesn't speak English or has an accent, it's like, ugh, you're less than. And it's like, even accents are like very negative here. And it's like, it shouldn't be, because that means you are able to communicate in more than one language. And that's a good thing. And those are the things that I find
affects your level of intelligence too, and I'm sure your EQ as well, and like all the things you're saying, like how you interact with others.
Exactly.
And navigate. I mean, things would be so much better. I think capitalism would be booming too. It would benefit the systems that to include other people.
Right, and also learning other languages gives you access because that cultural understanding thing is the part of like these white people that we're talking about. That's the issue, and that cultural understanding and reaching across the aisle is scary to them or deemed weak, and it's like. No, you need to understand other cultures. You need to travel outside your town and your state and country if you can.
To learn something.
But I understand that some people don't have the resources, but that should always be the objective, not the pride and like, oh, I've lived in, I've never left my state and that's okay. And I never met anyone outside my race. That's a problem because there's a whole world out there of people.
Yeah, but that comes from that fear mindset too.
Right.
And like of other people taking over or taking what they have or like.
But also knowing that I think in the back of their head that they aren't the best.
Yeah, where they're not able to actually compete.
Yeah, and that they're afraid to confront that because for years they've been fed these narratives that they are the best and they are where the world revolves around them, their culture. They are the elegant ones. They're the proper ones. They're the ones that can do everything. They can fix everything. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, that's why I left international development was because of that. I was tired of code switching and talking about development and stuff from the perspective of white elite people. That don't know anything or spend 3 months in a country and then think that they're the encyclopedia, not understanding that in some countries there's different ethnic groups and there's historical context to why things are how they are. And a lot of the problems in the developing world are due to colonization and European powers. So how dare you now go in and say, I'm going to fix this? And that was something that exactly. And that's like that white man's hero complex that they're going to fix it all and they have the answers, or you're just too dumb to figure it out. Let me come in and I'll be able to do it.
I don't know that this would ever happen because if they were to like really come to terms with this, they would have to reconcile the fact that they have been like the source of perpetuating the white supremacy, and it's not to their benefit at the end of the day, that they're not actually getting anything. I mean, the saying knowledge is power. Without knowing something, you really are powerless, and they really are at the whim of the system, but they perpetuate it by feeding into the narrative, by just going with it and being angry and living in fear, not going outside of their worlds. And because they're allowed not to too. They're allowed to thrive, staying in the bubbles that they stay in.
Right. That's true. Yeah. And they don't want to learn anything, and they just want to stay and keep in that, and that's why the media has a lot to do and to blame for it. But yeah, and I just think that's why I feel like the code switching is a problem, and I think the conversation can go all over the place.
I know, as we have,
and it has, but I do think that it all is a part of code switching as a point that it's not like it's how people of color navigate in the United States, and I think
in the world,
and it's like, and globally they standardized Western norms and cultural norms, right? Even the way we dress for work, what's professional with our hair and all these things, right? And, that's why I think it's important to talk about it broadly and talk about it all, because at the end of the day, code switching is to keep that Western standard as the norm or what's proper or accurate.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a problem.
Yeah. And when you get broad like that, then you bring more people into the conversation and have them realize, oh, wait, I am doing this, or I'm, I'm experiencing this, because it is, it affects everything.
But even when you travel abroad, people tell, like, they want to make you feel comfortable, right? Like, they're always looking to make white people feel comfortable in their culture or all these things. Like, that's what I mean. Like, it's a global thing, and it's like just perpetuating this notion that Western customs and things are the standard and should be applied everywhere. And it's like, fuck that. No, it's not. There are other ways. And it's not, again, not to say that it's different, but not to make one superior and one inferior. That's the whole point.
I agree. Yeah. we could go on talking about this conversation
right.
forever, and it would lead us to different paths. We really could be here all day talking about this and the nuance.
Yeah.
But yeah, we want to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, if you like, we would love to hear from you guys about, you know, situations of code switching or how you feel about it.
How you feel, how you've navigated through it. You know, stories. We're all about hearing stories from you guys. And, you know, thank you so much for listening to us and supporting us. And please be sure to follow us on social media, Deliberately Woke, subscribe, and look out for new episodes every Thursday.
Yeah, thank you guys for supporting us.
Thank you.